Side 7, The Atlantic Monthly, September 1995. Contents of Side 7, Books, The Moral State of Marriage, continued. Brief reviews. Word Watch. Continuing with Books, The Moral State of Marriage.
Wallerstein takes no ideological position on which type of marriage is best, but one of the book's most fascinating insights is that the egalitarian marriage, the model most highly prized and increasingly pursued by many younger Americans, is frighteningly fragile. Married couples with demanding careers can be pulled apart by jealousy, competitiveness, loneliness, worries about children, or sheer sleep deprivation. Worse, their taut working lives leave little room for mid-course adjustments, let alone unscheduled crises with a child who doesn't play by the developmental rule book. Of all marriage types, therefore, this one requires the most constant vigilance and the most heroic effort. More broadly, however, this study suggests that the challenges of marriage are essentially moral. That, I suspect, is why it is called the good marriage rather than the happy marriage. The book implicitly presents marriage as a school of virtue, a domain that requires tact and restraint, along with open and honest communication, kindness and gratitude along with assertiveness and autonomy. Take the matter of fighting. Good marriages are not free of conflict. However, the conflict is governed by a respect for the partner's deepest vulnerabilities. No matter how fierce the anger, it stops short of the cruelest cut. Spouses learn what the relationship can tolerate without breaking. At the same time, marriage requires the exercise of moral imagination. One thing the couples in these good marriages have in common is a vision of the marriage as a superordinate entity, something that is separate from and larger than its two parts. The men and women in this study speak of protecting the marriage, almost as if it were their child. It is a creation they cherish and share. In another sense, too, good marriages are expressions of the imagination. These happily married people see their spouses as essentially admirable and good, as morally worthy. Many express admiration for their partner's conscience or honesty, or praise their courage in overcoming earlier obstacles in life. Drawing on her research on divorce, Wallerstein observes that many people whose marriages eventually fail never had an idealized image of their partners to begin with. Much of what I have described is never made explicit. In fact, one of the nice things about the good marriage is its modesty. It doesn't pretend to offer a philosophy or even a lecture on marriage. It takes no position on the ideologically charged issues of women's marital roles and status. Equally important, it ignores the two most common ways of talking about marriage, as a contract negotiated between two equal parties, and as the pathway to individual fulfillment. For this reason, it is refreshingly free of rights talk and therapy talk. Indeed, Wallerstein places much more emphasis on the development of good judgment and a moral sense than on the acquisition of effective communication or negotiation skills. The good marriage offers powerful evidence in support of a model for relationships that are based not on theories of exchange or self-interest, but on notions of sacrifice and altruism. I suddenly got it about ensemble work, an actor told Wallerstein. Ensemble is when you work as hard for the other guy's moment as you do for your own. The good marriage is an argument for an ensemble theory of marriage.
Brief Reviews by Phoebe Lou Adams. Are We Alone by Paul Davies, basic 160 pages, $20. Professor Davies teaches natural philosophy at the University of Adelaide and promises to keep technical jargon to a minimum, or try to. His subject is philosophical implications of the discovery of extraterrestrial life, and technical jargon in the form of mathematical calculations well beyond the 3 R's level proves unavoidable. Unexpectedly, considering its subtitle, the book is more concerned with the pros and cons of the existence of extraterrestrial life than with the effect that the proof of such life would have on human thinking, which can be summarized as a heavy jolt. The author believes that extraterrestrial life does exist, but he presents contrary theories with such fair-minded clarity that a non-scientist reader with no entrenched opinion on the matter may find all the arguments equally plausible and come out by the same door wherein I went. Red Earth and Pouring Rain by Vikram Chandra, Little Brown, 560 pages, $24.45. Abhay, home in India after studying in the United States, has so far forgotten the proprieties as to shoot the white-faced monkey infesting his parents' roof. The victim survives, but the sacrilege deranges the proper functioning of the wheel, for the monkey recovers human consciousness and memory of his last human incarnation as a somewhat troublesome poet named Sanjay. It also attracts the attention of three gods. Abhay's parents privately hope that their house will not be required to accommodate the entire pantheon, who arrive at a treaty. Sanjay will not be killed and reincarnated as a crab if he can hold an audience long enough with a good enough story. Sanjay is optimistic. I won't tell what happened, he promises. I'll make a lie. I will construct a finely colored dream, a thing of passion and joy, a huge lie that will entertain and instruct and enlighten. I'll make the big Indian lie. That is a large promise, but the monkey keeps it, or rather Mr. Chandra does, with interlocking and overlapping tales of wars and intrigues, villains and holy men, jewels and blood, Alexander of Macedon and Abhay in Texas. The novel becomes the history of India converted into the brilliant disorder of a kaleidoscope. It is adroitly written, constantly interesting, lyrical, fantastic, brutal, and at bottom serious. Mr. Chandra can make a lightning bolt look like a Roman candle, but that bolt strikes. Peculiar People, The Story of My Life by Augustus Hare, Academy, Chicago, 320 pages, $26.95. Augustus John Cuthbert Hare, 1834 to 1903, published his autobiography in his old age. It ran to 6 volumes, admittedly in large type, and has been edited to reasonable size by Anita Miller and James Patt. Hare was born into an aristocratic English family, most of whose members were considerably worse than peculiar. As a small boy, he might well have envied the happy life of Oliver Twist. As an adult, he had no money, at least by his standards, but he collected cousins as others collect stamps, and could always find a country house to put him up. He also collected anecdotes, with which he enlivened a series of guidebooks that flourished for decades, and with which, as a raconteur, he became a valued guest. His text includes a lively description of Mark Twain, a report on Thomas Carlyle, complete with Scottish accent, tales of ghosts and ghastlies, and complaints about his publisher. His instrument was the pen rather than the harp, but in his way Hare was a wandering minstrel, and he is an attractive and sometimes witty acquaintance. The Queen of the Tambourine by Jane Gardam, St. Martin's, 240 pages, $20.95. Ms. Gardam's mischievous, ultimately poignant novel examines what happens to a clever, imaginative, lively woman whose husband reaches the rank of senior civil servant and maroons her in a stodgy, semi-posh London suburb with no occupation but good works and no reliable company but the dog. The woman reports on Christmas, "Sarah and Simon sent me talcum powder and soap. Charles gave me a card which contained another card inside it telling me that for a year I am a friend of redundant churches. This means that I am authorized now to visit any decaying church in the United Kingdom, taking a friend with me free of charge. Henry gave me a pot plant, a transparent cyclamen, its flowers limp with thirst, its rubber tube stalks bent down. When I watered it, it gave up the ghost." One can see why the first-person narrator of this ingenious novel, who appears initially to be an officious and annoying busybody, has in fact gone quietly mad. Ms. Gardam's oblique approach is humorous and expertly controlled from its deceptive beginning to its ambiguous end. Hunters and Gatherers by Francine Prose. Ferrer, Strauss, and Giroux, 247 pages, $20. Ms. Prose's heroine, Martha, a stolidly unimaginative fact-checker at a stolidly moderate women's magazine, is moping on the beach at Fire Island when she falls in with a group of enthusiastic, demonstratively affectionate worshippers of the great goddess. They are led by Isis Moonwagon. With no other social life to speak of, Martha becomes a misfit member of the androphobic female solidarity cult and winds up with them on a pilgrimage to study with a Native American shamaness in the wilds of Arizona. Isis Moonwagon is accident-prone, and so is the trip. One ridiculous contretemps follows another. The lesbian lovers split. The mother and daughter exchange snarls. Innate cattiness surfaces, and the climate is a killer. Ms. Prose describes the debacle in elegantly restrained style, creating a novel that is satirically amusing but not unsympathetic. Her women are superficially silly, but their desire for a more generous ethic than society has offered them is not. Writing Home by Alan Bennett. Random House, 432 pages, $25. Mr. Bennett, the author of The Madness of King George and of numerous successful television shows, offers a miscellany of memoirs, diary excerpts, occasional pieces, and book reviews, most of the material involving the theater. The diaries are of particular interest because they describe what the author experiences, notices, and sometimes suffers as one of his television scripts is brought to life on location. He observes that he has very little knowledge of ordinary life. I imagine it in a script and come up against the reality only when the script gets filmed, so the process can be a bit of an eye-opener. Such unexpected revelations and opinions are frequent rewards in this quirky collection. Kate Furbish and the Flora of Maine by Ada Graham and Frank Graham, Jr., Tilbury House, 170 pages, $30. Although technically an amateur, Kate Furbish, 1834 to 1931, was a formidably efficient botanist whose study of the plants of Maine produced admirable illustrations, too few of which are reproduced here in color, and records. Her early work was carried on in the days when stage drivers in a rustic county kept firearms alongside as a practical policy. It is not explained who the expected bandits were. Furbish was particularly fond of bogs. This agreeably unpretentious biography conjures up, among other visions, the picture of a highly respectable spinster in properly long skirts up to the knee in a mud hole and undeterred in her pursuit of orchids. An odd and charming little book.
Word Watch, a selection of terms that have been newly coined, that have recently acquired new currency, or that have taken on new meanings, compiled by the executive editor of the American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language, 3rd edition, by Anne H. Sukanoff. Anxious class, noun. U.S. workers at all levels of competence and rank who are overworked and affected by the prospect of joblessness, whose wages have failed to increase or even to keep up with inflation, and who may not be valued by their employers over the long term. A class consciousness may be emerging from shared anxiety, an awareness among millions of Americans that they occupy the same unsteady boat, even if they are doing well in high-paying jobs. Labor Secretary Robert B. Reich describes the anxious class as consisting of millions of Americans who no longer can count on having their jobs next year or next month, and whose wages have stagnated or lost ground to inflation. New York Times. Background. Today's managers, support staff, technicians, and line workers all experience much the same job-related angst. But unlike, for example, Marx's working class, the anxious class has no identifiable rhetoric or vocabulary, and no designated enemy. Instead, as the article cited above points out, business is seen as also a victim, caught in a global competition that forces cost-cutting and layoffs. Anxious class is one more item in the growing lexicon of an uncertain business climate. Another example, recently explored in this space, is constant whitewater, which refers to the relentless turmoil faced by corporate managers. AstroTurf, trademark, used figuratively to denote advocacy advertising, chiefly on local television, that has been created to resemble a grassroots movement and is intended to influence lawmakers indirectly by changing public opinion. At a time when there is growing distrust of anything emanating from official Washington, AstroTurf campaigns have the advantage of offering at least a semblance of populism. New York Times. Background. Such synthetic grassroots campaigns, engineered by special interest groups, are modeled on last year's Harry and Louise television ad series, sponsored by the insurance industry, in which a worried couple pored over the Clinton health care initiative. The series is widely credited with helping to derail public support for the plan. AstroTurf ads usually depict just folks characters. For example, in one, sponsored by a tobacco company and an insurance company with a clear stake in tort law reform, an affable senior citizen proclaimed, "Fewer people nowadays are willing to accept responsibility for their own doings. I tell you, the system is out of whack." Experts are unsure of the efficacy of AstroTurf campaigns, but they caution that many more are sure to come. Fat skis, plural noun, slang, double-wide downhill snow skis, also called fat boards, fatties, training wheels. Thanks to the invention of fat skis, thousands of ordinary skiers are discovering the joy of skiing on powder snow. Because they require far less effort to maneuver in powder and other challenging snow conditions, fat skis can add years to a skier's career. Wall Street Journal. Background. Fat skis were developed by the Austrian ski designer Rupert Huber, who cut a snowboard down the middle and mounted downhill bindings on each half. Huber had noticed that snowboarders are able to float on powder rather than submarining beneath the surface like inexperienced skiers on conventional skis. Fat skis, now in a more sophisticated design, are being used by some ski schools to train beginners. However, they are scorned by most longtime powder skiers who consider it cheating to use them. High-rise cat syndrome. Noun. The complex of injuries ranging from pulmonary contusions to limb and dental fractures sustained by a cat that has fallen from a substantial height. Indeed, for pets as for humans, summer in the city can be brutal. For this is the season of high-rise cat syndrome, when pets plunge inexplicably from 20th-story windows. New York Times. Background. More generally called high-rise syndrome, since it also has involved dogs, ferrets, a turtle, and even an iguana, this condition goes back in the veterinary medicine literature to at least 1976, when it was called high-rise trauma syndrome. According to one veterinarian who has treated hundreds of survivors, the syndrome occurs chiefly in New York, where the numerous, often unair-conditioned high-rise buildings frequently lack window screens because the population of flying insects is paltry. Surprisingly, the farther the fall after a certain point, the lower the mortality rate, and the fewer the serious injuries. Cats reach their maximum velocity after falling about 5 stories and begin thereafter to relax into a horizontal position that slows their fall and distributes the impact. Last summer, one cat survived after falling 46 stories, which is believed to be a record.
End of the Atlantic Monthly. Read by Martha Harmon Pardee, Susan Rossman, Dave Jackson, Jake Williams, Jim Zeiger and Eric Sandvold, in the studios of Talking Book Publishers, Incorporated, for the Library of Congress, September 1995. For special distribution, as authorized by Act of Congress under Public Law 89-522, with the permission of the copyright holder. If you experienced any difficulty with this recording, please specify the problem on a postcard or letter addressed to Materials Development Division, National Library Service for the Blind and Physically Handicapped, Washington, D.C. 20542.